Live, Tim. We are live, and I'm just going to send people a note to say,
goody.
We're live, and we're going to kick off in a few minutes.
We're definitely live. There's 4 in the chat. There's 4 online.
Yeah, they haven't made any questions yet, though. So if anyone's listening to us, they're welcome to start putting their questions up. We can talk about how Ozzy and Elias are coping with
they're in bed.
The confinement. Oh, they're in bed. Oh, that's very good.
We've done well tonight. Yep. Can that phone sit there? Maybe it can.
So send everybody the invite and maybe remind them of the. I don't need to do that. It's just up the top there. Andrew Jolly's present, so I'm sure we're going to get some really interesting questions.
Just a pity we can't talk to them. What would Andrew say if he was here?
Well, we could have, but it was like, 7 to 1. 7 people wanting to just be streamed and ask the questions this way, and 1 person who wanted a Zoom session. So, like many ecclesial things, we just succumbed to the wish of the greater number.
We've got Gus. G'day, Gus.
Gus, yeah. So we know that the chat function works. That's good. So you can interrupt with a question at any time, and we'll do our best to answer it at the next opportunity.
Jamie too. Hey, Jamie.
And you can blame me if I forget. It's my job to insert the questions from the audience at the appropriate time. Yes. So I hope you're all settled down nicely. You've got your cup of coffee or tea or other beverage of choice, and sitting by the fire. Because Tim's got his feet to the fire at the moment.
Feet to the carpet.
Feet to the carpet.
Yes. No shoes. It's a no shoes presentation.
My wife would tell you that this corner of the house is the only corner of the house that looks tidy at the moment. Because over Easter, basically, we pulled up a whole heap of carpet, painted the office, and yeah.
My wife would tell you, don't look at this room. This is the one that has the door closed on it when people come around.
Yeah, that's usually my office, except it's been almost stripped bare and all the walls painted. It's amazing how much damage they get. I don't know what we've been doing in there, but lots of damage. And I don't recall ever sticking my feet up on the wall, but underneath my desk, there's a lot of feet marks. Angus says I forget how messy my desk is, but people can't see my desk, so everything's fine. And yes, Jamie, but the bricks are painted white, right? And they're white, just a bit of textural.
It's a whitewashed sepulchre brick.
Textual.
Whitewashed sepulchre. I'm losing words this time of the night.
And if I talk any more about what it's like at home, the house might be full of dead men's bones.
Nice.
Yes. All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening. And what we will do is we will begin with a word of prayer. We won't finish with a word of prayer today, but we'll begin with a word of prayer, and I'll do that for you if you just bow your heads. Our loving Heavenly Father, we come into thy presence now, acknowledging thou art the King of all the earth, and we long for the time when all the earth will give honour and praise to thee. We come before thee this night to consider our work in service to Thee and how we can use content to help to teach and preach our brothers and sisters and interested friends in a way that respects the people who've created it and the laws of the land that Thou hast put in place through those leaders that Thou hast established over our country. We pray that Thou would suit us Thy blessing, that the things that we do may give honour and praise to Thy name as we seek Thy blessing through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
All right. So thanks everyone for joining us, and this is a new format and one that we might find other purposes for in the future. And I'm very grateful that Tim is going to join us tonight. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Andrew, and thank you for your help preparing this conversation tonight.
Well, and thanks for the effort that you've put in to researching it and getting it ready to ask questions. And, let's try and make this as interactive as possible. So if you have questions out there, please ask them and interrupt with them even. So if you've got concerns or challenges or things that you have done that have worked really well, or opportunities that we could take advantage of, then let us know. So
yeah, we'd
Tim,
like to hear as much, what problems you have, as well as where things have worked well, where you've had a success with something, where you reached out and everything worked wonders. So please interrupt. I'm not very good at monologue. Actually, I'm very good at it, but I shouldn't be. It's boring.
Well, what I enjoy about this opportunity is we can turn the tables, because usually I'm sitting on the other side of your questions. So
I'll need a music break, Andrew. All right. So we'll try and kick off. So copyright and IP meaning intellectual property, and particularly tonight we're talking about the age of YouTube, because that's really what has fundamentally changed and why we're having this presentation today. So thanks everyone for making some time to come out tonight. And the core reason we want to talk about this evening is because, as Christadelphians, representatives of the Cumberland Ecclesia, we have a very unique position that we need to hold on to make sure that our interested friends and our members both have respect for the way that we preach and the message that we have, in the sense that we have a unique position in the Christian market, if you might want to call it that we rely so strongly on the Word of God, taking inspiration directly from the Word, reading the Bible. If we get away from that, or we end up with accusations of other things, we risk that position, we risk the authority we have to preach. So I'll also start with a sorry. I'll start with an apology, and I'll tell you what I'm apologizing for a little bit later. So can you see the screen, the PowerPoint presentation, Andrew?
No, not yet, but I can put it up for you.
Okay.
So what you like?
Yeah. That's the business. Okay, so what's really changed for us? Effectively, YouTube has ended our age of ignorance, and I've deliberately misquoted the Bible here. That's always a good thing to do. Start with a deliberate misapplication and use that to justify our position. Truly, these times of ignorance God overlooked, but now commands all men everywhere to repent. So our age of ignorance about copyright and intellectual property is unfortunately over, and we need to change our behavior, because one, it's the right thing to do, morally, legally, spiritually, all of the above. And two, there are consequences if we don't. And we'll go through some of those. They're personal, they affect the ecclesia, they affect our reputation, and they affect our Father's reputation as well. And the reason for a very, very deliberate misquote here of the Apostle Paul in Acts is that it fits. It fits kind of beautifully. So this is about Paul's discourse about the unknown God on Mars Hill. So talking about, what he was presenting there. Paul says, you made an altar to a God that you didn't claim to know about, but you only made half a try. You should have sought to know him properly. You're claiming to worship him. You really couldn't be bothered making the effort. God made the world. His making, therefore, gives him the right to be acknowledged, and everything he made to be used in the way that he intended. Or you can try and seek his forgiveness and see how that works out for you. God has provided a path to be known, and we can't pretend the path doesn't exist, and so he remains unknowable. There's a judgment coming. We'd like to avoid the nasty side of that. And the identical principles apply to our copyright position today as we seek to respect and abide by the laws of the land.
Yeah, and I think nothing that you're saying today is about, people setting out to break the law. And I think a lot of us have sort of innocently used things in the wrong way in the past. But there's consequences nowadays if we do that in the future. And it's something that we ought to pay attention to.
Mm-hmm. And really, these ideas aren't new. So the Copyright Act that underpins all of this is from 1968, and there was a previous one before that. But we've really gone on a bit of a journey as far as Christadelphians in the Cumberland Ecclesia. Good old days with the chalk dust, moving on to overhead projectors. I still remember it was one of the Bible schools. I was Brother Ron Cowie's overhead projector page turner. That was quite an exalted position at the front of the hall at Bible school. But we started to move into the danger zone when we got access to digital printers and photocopiers. Anything could run through those amazing devices, almost anything. The internet came and we copied and pasted absolutely everything we could lay our hands on. And then we started to publish a lot more things, but mostly this was within the Brotherhood. It was by us, for us. We could flout a lot of the rules, and some of the other rules were covered by our copyright licensing that we subscribe to, and we are still subscribed to, which you can access via the recorder. So we have a lot of permission to do things for ourselves, for our own consumption within the bounds of the Cumberland Ecclesial Hall. But then coronavirus happened and YouTube happened, and we started sticking everything online. And that is somewhere between the world of performance and publishing. And it's just, we've told everybody in the whole world about it, and we're sharing all of our content with everyone. And unfortunately, that puts us in a horrific copyright position, because we're essentially reproducing everything that we copy and paste now. We're now publishing it as if we should have the rights to do that. And over time, I think it's important to acknowledge that what we're now emphasizing or considering to be a problem with YouTube is a result of the changes in our teaching that's occurred over the years. We've loved to see more pictures. We've loved to see extra content, videos and sounds and all those wonderful things, because we're used to other presenters on the internet and the TV showing those kinds of exciting things, and we want to keep up with that. And in some sense, we haven't had the budgets or the big back of house stuff to keep up with those other churches that have whole digital content creation groups. And yet we want to try, but we probably shouldn't, because unless we're creating the material, we're going to end up in a lot of trouble. And unfortunately, at the moment, the reason YouTube is such a danger to us is because the copyright breach process there is so easy. YouTube makes it very easy for them to chase us for material. It has automated checking. It supports the copyright owners rather than the person who claims to be using copyright. There is a 3 strikes and you're dead model. And dead is pretty dead. It means our channel gets chopped off, and every last piece of content we uploaded to it is no longer accessible because it's all tarred with the one brush. And it's harder to fight than it is to win. So,
and when you consider that we've put a lot of effort into something like 732 talks on our YouTube channel, that's a big investment of people's time to put that there. I mean the speakers as well as the people who've done the streaming. So it's quite an effort to have put it there, and it doesn't take much for us to keep it right and keep it out of YouTube's way. We've had stuff come down because the YouTube robots have found that we're playing somebody else's music or whatever it might be. So far, we don't have any strikes, and that's the way we really need to keep it.
So remember also that everything that you say gets turned into text in YouTube with the automatic transcript. It is really, really easy in this current world for any content owner to enforce their copyright, to say, I see what you've said, I see what you've put up, I see what you've played, and to cause one of those strikes. So it's getting easier and easier for copyright owners to protect their material, which means for all of the reasons we've already said, it's got to be really important for us to help them protect themselves too.
Yes, it's searchable, right? People can find people who are using their content, even being able to search for images. So it's quite a different world that we live in, and we're quite exposed if we're not careful.
Thanks, Andrew. So one of the really important reminders here is that we've all personally made a commitment to uphold the commandments of Christ, and the law of the Bible is essentially that we are subject to the laws of the land where they don't contradict God's instructions to us. So we do need to obey the law. Just throwing this one out there because we know it fairly well, but we need to come back to it and remind ourselves of it occasionally. We can't flout these laws. We can't, pave the road to hell with good intentions, to coin a phrase. We need to do the right thing for the right reasons in the right way. All of the right things added up together work. We represent the whole body of God, the whole ecclesia, and we carry his name with us. We need to do that in exactly the right way. So coming to the Copyright Act then, which is very thrilling material, 250 pages and then some of comprehensive legal fun, which I do enjoy. So there's a few interesting notes to point out here for those who aren't familiar with it, and I'm really shocked that you didn't read that for bedtime reading. You would have fallen asleep after 2 pages. So copyright gives the owner the rights to reproduce their material, publish their material, perform their material, communicate their material in public. Communicate in public equals YouTube. Make an adaptation of the work. And it lasts for an extremely long time, and nobody else can do these things without permission or an exception. There are a couple of exceptions, but don't get your hopes up. So the important things to note is in Australia, a copyright owner does not have to apply for it. They don't have to use this little C up here, the copyright symbol. They don't have to use it. That denotes ownership, but they don't have to use it. It is a nice reminder, but it's not required. They have these rights inalienably. Good word there. They don't have to make it available. If I make something and I put it up somewhere, I don't have to respond to you. I don't have to let you use it. It can be mine exclusively for as long as I live, plus 70 years. And that's legitimately legal. It's mine by rights. They don't have to be contactable. Their copyright can only be taken away if somebody else says it was mine first. It's about the only thing you can do. So to talk through some of these meanings, reproduce, publish, perform. Reproduce has that sense of copy, photocopy, copy and paste, write out, film it, record it, or scan it. Publishing includes showing on YouTube in a slide or using in your own article, so something that you have incorporated and put up for public consumption. Perform in public means reading a quote, singing a song, playing a movie or a song, or even emailing something out to public distribution. Communicating to the public covers practically everything else. Making an adaptation means using their idea but changing it a bit, and we'll come back to that a little bit more later. You've really got to change it a lot to be able to use something. And public is the key bit here. So there are definitely exceptions available for personal domestic use within your own study, however messy that is, and in-house education. So a Sunday school teacher writing something on the blackboard, copying out a piece of text is not breaching copyright because they have a limited audience and they're doing it for the purposes of education. But the moment we take that same model and apply it into the YouTube world, we're in breach. So is there any particular questions at this point? That's probably a fairly sticky one in terms of the Copyright Act itself. Anything strike you as odd, strange, weird?
I think the thing that perhaps we sometimes miss is that with all these different mediums that or media that created works can come in, we can somehow think that because something was written out of a book, if we then speak it, that we're not breaching copyright. But the owner still has the rights to use it in whatever sort of way he likes or she likes.
Yeah, copy and paste or perform being read it out. All of these things, it covers pretty well everything. There's very few exceptions, and we'll have a look at those exceptions in a moment because they do help to illustrate why they exist, basically. So there are things that are not automatically copyright. An idea is not copyright. or information style and technique are not copyright. So these things in themselves don't get you a copyright. You actually have to request to trademark those kinds of things to make money out of them. So that's a different kind of thing altogether. You don't get copyright for an idea, you get copyright for an expression of an idea. So an idea is flying cars, information is the weather or politics, facts or things that you can't suppress. But copyright is a document on how to create a flying car or how to measure the weather. Wouldn't say measure politics because it's irrelevant, right? So once you've turned an idea into a creative work, you have the copyright to protect your work, your time, and your investment. And that's something that we have when we put up YouTube. And it's important to remember this copyright applies to the Cumberland Ecclesia too. We are automatically protected from others using our work against us. So we want the same rules to apply to us in general, even though we don't tend to fight things at law. But when it comes to fair dealings, so you might have heard the word fair use or the term fair use applied before. I've got a reasonable basis to use something, and this might be something that we've assumed previously. Fair use is actually an American term. Doesn't apply here legally in Australia. Australia has a fair dealing thing, and the Copyright Australian Commission thing is really, really hot on protecting this because they reckon they'll lose billions of dollars to Australian creators if fair dealing turns into fair use. Question from Steve. Can a Sunday school teacher print a colouring page in page of lesson from Google Images if it's to a limited audience? Yes, but no. We'll cover Google Images at the end of the program, Steve, because there's an option to choose from there. Essentially, if you're talking about something that is really copyrighted, no.
Without permission. If you get permission, it's a different matter.
Yeah, and Andrew's no, educational institutions, we're not technically an educational institution. We do a bit of education in terms of Sunday school, but it is quite limited. So it still has that limited element, and perhaps the CAL's license is probably more applicable there in terms of what it allows us to do, but we'll see if we can get through there. Yep, schools and unis, the ones with a .edu on the end of their email address. So we've got a number of fair dealing types to work through. So if you're in one of these fair dealing types, you have a limited ability to use a copyrighted piece of material without seeking permission. So these are fair dealing exceptions to copyright. Oh. Why does Peanut Phil have a question?
He says, are quotations from books on slides a breach then? So the answer is often that they will be, but we'll get to the question. Tim can get to the question of to what extent can we quote from books and when.
Okay. And Don's quite correct there, and we'll come to that one too, particularly some translations more than others. So in our fair dealing exceptions, there are a number, and these are directly out of the Copyright Act. So research or study is a fair dealing exception. If you're doing research or study, you can access some copyrighted materials and make some copies. And we do that, but I want you to think about this instead of talking about studies as we would talk about them, talk about it as copying parts of articles or books, parts of, into a research document that you think about when you create a talk. So it's not material that you've copied into the talk, it's material that you've personally collated to help you put the talk together. Research or personal study, personal research, not shared research. Parody or satire is the third one down there. We've skipped over one quite deliberately. Parody or satire. Parody makes fun of something while producing an original work. So you've taken one piece of work, you've made fun of it, and made a new work as a result of that. I don't think we're really in the parody game, but I've been proven wrong before. Satire is the other option there, which uses irony, sarcasm, scorn, and derision. Now, unless you're performing the Messiah, no scorn and derision, please, to criticize a negative thing. So it's when you're really having a bash at something. and I don't think that fits the way we want to preach, so we'll just move along from there. Again, these are the only exceptions you've got to actually asking the copyright owner for permission to use their material. Reporting the news is an option. Now, we're not a news station, so this wouldn't fit particularly well if we were challenged on it, but the exception stops news of interest being stifled by copyright. So a copyright owner can't say, you know, I've presented this piece of news, you can't use that anywhere else. News is facts, but it does protect the original content which took work to produce. So if they've used a picture in the news, if they've performed commentary and analysis, then that is protected by their copyright. But a piece of news, as in a fact about a country that's done this, that, or the other, or you know what Putin's up to, those facts can be copied because they are the news. So we can report on the news, but don't copy the commentary and the analysis that came from the esteemed mind of that journalist, no matter what you might think about their capabilities. Enabling a person with disability, unlikely to apply to us. Perhaps you might consider that in terms of the oldies. No offense, Uncle John. You know, if their eyesight's failing and they can't get to the news very often, maybe you've helped them with that, but unlikely in a YouTube scenario. Looking at Andrew's question there, American produced item of copyright streamed on an American platform by someone in Australia covered by fair use or fair dealing.
So the copyright relates to the creator. So it's the people who've created the content who have obtained the copyright under Australian legislation. So in our case, if the content's been created in Australia, then it's certainly the fair dealing that applies. And the question of what happens to people's content created in other countries is an interesting question. Whether fair use could apply to it, I don't know the answer, Tim.
I'll look that one up and get back to you on that one, Andrew. It's an intriguing one as to whether they could claim the laws of copyright protect them. I think there's to some degree reciprocal agreements between the countries. It in the same sense that America gets quite upset when China copies their intellectual property. They don't assume that, oh well, it's a different country, you can do as you please. They'll pursue them in international law. So,
and it is part of our trade. So the free trade agreement, for instance, that we have with a number of countries, pretty much all of them have references to copyright. Certainly the US one does.
All right, so we'll get back to that one for you, Andrew, just to confirm and close that one out. Legal advice, we don't offer law services, but coming back to criticism or review is probably the most useful fair dealing exception that we have available to us. So neither criticism nor review means this article agrees with me and proves my point. So don't put up an article and say, and here, yep, this is exactly what I said, here, take this. Criticism or review, the only sort of real one we have to use as fair dealing says, put up a picture, put up an article, talk about that article in terms of what it got right, what it got wrong, actually review the content within it. So you can criticize the film Noah, which was a pile of rubbish, but you can't use scenes from it to illustrate a talk on Noah. There's quite different conversations. So Andrew Jolly has said the issue is for the person publishing it, not the person consuming it. Republishing USA materials in Australia would likely be the problem, I assume. In other words, you've breached the Australian law, which protected the copyright owner, even though they were not protected by the law themselves, potentially. So criticism or review is probably the most useful one we've got here. Research or study is a personal one. Criticism or review, you could claim that in a YouTube content. You'd need to be using those words. You'd need to be talking about how you're performing a review of something or deliberately criticizing, sharing the material in full and going through it like that. So to bring it down to some fairly core principles, there's a word or term called substantial part. So as a core principle, if I've created an original work, be that a piece of writing, a speech, a diagram, a picture, photo, or video, I, as the copyright owner, have sole right to determine who can use that, when they can use that, and how they can use that, unless they apply to one of those exceptions. So my skills in language or art created this piece of quality, even though you might think otherwise. So you can quote or copy a small part of my work, but if you quote or copy a substantial part, then you've breached the copyright. And substantial is not measured in a percentage or measured in a number of words. It's measured in quality, importance, and meaning. And there's a number of fascinating examples around there of how few words can make up a substantial part. So try to think of it this way. If the words you're trying to quote or you want to quote are a core part of my argument, if they're a pithy statement or a vital conclusion, no matter how few words there are, it's a substantial part and you shouldn't copy it. So cropping a picture is very unlikely to help there. So the quality argument is going to hold. Why else would you be copying the picture and cropping a piece of it out unless the quality was useful enough and material enough that it had meaning to you? So, and quality can relate to the skill used to produce it. So the artist is worthy in that sense. So if you're using someone else's material for your benefit, and you includes Cumberland there, it is a breach. So most of the allowable examples, the exceptions really, promote the original author in the aid of education, critique, public interest, or law. So just to repeat that again, most of the allowable examples or the exceptions to the copyright law, the fair dealing ones, talk about promoting the original author to aid education, critique, public interest, and supporting the law. So none of those things are supporting the gospel, supporting your thoughts, supporting your brand or your presentation. So they just don't fit. So consider an example, if you will, then. So if I stood up in Rundle Mall on a soapbox, assuming there are actually some people around, and I announced that Bruce Gerd says, "You're all materialistic sinners and you're going to die." Now, Bruce has the right to determine how his intellectual property is used, assuming he's said these words on a platform, and I dare say I could find them if I really looked hard enough. Bruce really does have the right to say, "Tim, I don't want you to say that. That's not a good way to associate my name and my words in a public place. I'd really rather you didn't say that. You should have asked permission first." So the real strong principle is speak for yourself only and use your own words wherever possible. Have we got another couple of questions in there?
Oh, well, I noticed you were referring to Bruce there. And, I think that's a bit unfair because he can't be here tonight. He's got an ACBM meeting, so. But I did find a reasonably definitive statement from copyright, the Australian Copyright Council, and it says fair use is an exception in United States copyright law and applies only in that jurisdiction. Fair use applies more broadly than fair dealing, but is less certain. So it would seem that if you want to stay on the right side of the law, accept the position of the Department of Communications and the Arts in their copyright modernisation consultation paper, which basically says that it only applies when you're actually in the United States, and last I looked, we weren't.
So that's coming back to that concept that copyright is automatic for the owner of the art, in that sense, Andrew, I suppose. So therefore, if you're in America, you get to use the fair use exception to let you use it. If you're in Australia, you can use fair dealing to let you use it. But if you're not actually applying to one of those two legal scenarios, you can't use it at all.
Yeah. And people, it's very difficult to prosecute people in Australia for laws that they are not bound by because they're not citizens of the United States.
All right. So now to illustrate by example. So biblical principle from Leviticus 11 verse 13. Whatsoever parteth the hoof and is cloven-footed and cheweth the cud among the beasts, that shall ye eat. So we've got a long-standing principle of chewing the cud, ruminating on things, meditating on the words of God before we produce something. So if we're chewing the cud, you're using the research and study rules to grab great fistfuls of grass, you're ruminating on it a while, you regurgitate it a bit, then chew it some more. It's a lovely process. But in the end, you produce something different, like a lovely muffin, right? You're producing something different. If the end result still looks like grass, you haven't chewed it enough. Go back and try again. So if this is the one picture that sticks with you tonight, I hope that works. Chew the grass, make a muffin. If it still looks like grass, run it through another cycle. You get the research and study exception up front, but still don't copy everything. You're taking pieces out of an article. You're taking sort of up to 10% of something to perform that research and study. So
nice analogy, Tim, and good to see that you've attributed the drawings to the authors.
PowerPoint did all of this nicely for me. So I used the online pictures. I ticked the box that said Creative Commons only, and it has these little, texty bits down the bottom. This photo by author is licensed under Creative Commons, etc., etc. So good to go here. Just had to leave that in, and away we go. Nice and easy. We'll cover Google a little bit later. So that's how to do it in the Office application. Just tick that Use Creative Commons only when you're inserting an online picture and using that search criteria. So that was Office 2019. I think it's in 2016 as well. If you've got an earlier version that might be a bit different, please let me know if you've got any concerns there.
Nice work, Tim. Good.
Good pictures coming from Andrew too. So a few scenarios of no. Bit of a negative side, this one, but let's see how we go. Scenario 1, but it's really easily available on the internet. It's so easy to get to. Well, there's the trap. So some news articles, and Bruce pointed this out in his research, they've got a defined process and price for using an article. It's about $70 per 100 people that will see it. So they value themselves pretty highly, and how many do you think are possibly going to see it on YouTube is the issue. You've got to stump up on it. The other issue is assuming that the person on the internet had permission to put it there in the first place is a bit of a dicey position. So unless you're certain that you're dealing with the original copyright owner, probably don't copy it. How can I tell if something's copyright? Everything is, assume it is. If you can't get permission, then you can't use it. If you're only using a small part, if it's an important part, then it's not covered by fair dealing quote. If it's the substantial part, if it's the really pithy statement that you want to use because you can't say it better yourself, yeah, it's not really covered. It's designed for those smaller pieces. If you really can't say it any better yourself, share a link to the article. Share it in its original location so that other people can read it. We'll be happy to print you something out, Dave. You just have to wait for the end of the virus until you can get it, okay?
We just find something on the internet we can copy.
I'll find a template. All right. So if you can't say it any better, share a link to the article in the newsletter or send it around via email so that everyone else can read it directly where it came from. That way you're not in any trouble and everyone else can benefit from the research that you've done. So it's a different way of thinking about things. What if I attributed it or referenced it? Well, this is one of those good intentions that we talked about earlier. Yes, I've fallen for this one before, but because we're not a university, because we're not an educational institution, we don't have any allowable exception for this. And because we are doing this publicly on YouTube, all of that stuff is out the window. It can't really hurt. Maybe we might say that, but unfortunately, the age of YouTube, it can really hurt our brand, the Christadelphian Ecclesia, our representation of our Father, and us. Who wants to be the guy that gets, their name dragged through mud all over the internet? They use my stuff without permission. You'd think they'd know better. What hypocrites? All that kind of stuff, right? What if it's a Christadelphian work? Think of that Brother Bruce Gerd example I used just a moment earlier. Even a Christadelphian should be asked for permission before you're using their words. Consider first if this was your stuff. What would you want to know if you were asked to have your material used. Maybe you'd freely give it out, do what you like with it. Maybe you just want to know where you're going to use it, how you're going to use it. Are you making up something else? Why do you want to quote me? You're a brother, same as I am. You were baptized with the same water, that kind of thing, right? Christadelphian works that are about the same. And even if you're just speaking it, YouTube is writing it all down. So it's very, very easy now for transcripts to turn it into text and keep a copy of that.
I know you're talking about the nose there, Tim, but it just reminds me of some of the things that we might like to do. And Brother Peter Schwarzkopf did it for his more recent works anyway, which is to specifically put some information in there about how people could use the work if they wished. So I think, that's something that we can do. If we see that our work, could be used in one way or another, then being explicit about how it can be used by other people in the Brotherhood is something to think about and make it easy for them so they don't need to come looking for us, perhaps.
Yeah, that works. Leave some contact details in there somewhere. So in terms of biblical references, a couple of important ones that Andrew prepared earlier. So thanks, Andrew. So from 2 Timothy chapter 2, talking about the work in the ecclesia, study to show yourself approved, a workman that doesn't need to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. Shun profane and vain babblings; they'll increase unto more godliness. So study to show yourself approved. You don't want to be ashamed. You've rightly divided it. You've prepared. You've researched. You've done the right thing. You've chewed the cud well. Lots of regurgitation. And in Titus, showing thyself a pattern of good works, uncorruptness in doctrine, gravity, sincerity, and the ideas there are integrity as well. The idea that you're presenting your own material in your own name, in your own voice, in your own way, and that everyone can look at you and say, I like what came out of your head. That's a good thing.
And it's genuinely yours. It's not someone else's thought that you didn't attribute.
In terms of practical thoughts, so when we're talking about current events, presentations, and articles, so again, back to that news concept, we can quote the facts. So if an article says a particular thing, we can use the facts in that article to say, Putin is now doing this. And our broader research can give us the position of why we believe that Putin is doing something in a particular way. The commentary is ours, but the article provides the facts. Always direct the reader or listener to the original if they want to analyze what you've said and back that up for themselves. When it comes to pictures, seek permission or use Creative Commons, and we'll show another example of that in a moment on Google, or use the critique model to talk about the picture. Don't just put it up there and say, look, there's a pretty picture that demonstrates my model. Talk about the way the picture's been done, what you see in it, what you like in it, what you don't like in it, to make it part of the critique or review. When it comes to quoting from the Bible, pick your version carefully and use the appropriate conditions, and we've got a slide on that in a moment. But really, I think one of the lessons coming out of this is we need to go back to basics a little bit, back to the chalkboard. So don't put handouts onto the screen. We've got very used to sort of copying and pasting large slabs of text into screens, and we're finding more and more, particularly with YouTube now, people are sitting at home, they're sitting on smaller screens, and they can't read it particularly well. Maybe they couldn't even read it in the hall. So don't put handouts onto the screen. Handouts are actually a far more flexible model that we can use in terms of our education system in the ecclesia and the copyright model and the copyright licensing that we're subscribed to. Handouts are a better way to convey material that you want to share with an audience, including via the email newsletter. So keep your slides really simple to convey the central focus of the particular thing that you're talking about at the time. Use pictures to support you with review and critique where Creative Commons applies or you've asked for permission. So get back to that idea that a talk is not an article. You need to present to your audience in the right way. Remember who they are, the way they're thinking, and how they're hearing and seeing, and everything that can get in the way of that. The distance from the screen, the hearing, their eyesight, the YouTube screen size, all of these things get in the way. We need to get back to things that are far more simple. So this probably about the point where I come to the apology, which is to do as I say, not as I do. So I'm utterly sorry to whatever extent you perceive me to be a hypocrite during tonight's presentation. I have absolutely learned a lot as I've been going through and researching some of this, and I'm still learning. So please forgive me.
By the way, the PowerPoint is available for those who would like it. So we'll distribute a link to that in the Dropbox. But I would comment that Brother Tony Lyons' talk the other night, I think, was a really good example. You know, he knew where his images were coming from. They didn't need to be attributed, and they were freely available. But his slides had, you know, really good, succinct content, really well presented. For the widescreen, by the way, that was a good reminder of what our slides ought to look like. And if you've got handouts as a presenter that you want to send around to the ecclesia, we will happily put them on the Dropbox and put the links in the newsletter, or even if you want them specially sent out, we'll send out a special newsletter.
Yeah, so it's a quite different thing. You put it up on YouTube and it's publishing to the world. You send it out to just the ecclesia, and it's an internal education model that for different rules under different copyright conditions, and we have a license to some extent for that. So still abide by the 10% rule when you're doing that if you want to copy things, but you can send out links, you can send out small pieces of things under a different set of conditions, different to sticking it up on YouTube. So things that we can use, so up to 20 words from a newspaper, the facts of that were presented in that newspaper article, or 5 linked headlines. So they're still pretty stingy when it comes to the material they want us to share. And the reason for that is they don't want, you know, their clicks going via our website. They want to have all the links themselves. Bruce noted that the editors of the major Christadelphian magazines are always willing to oblige if they're approached, and the names are listed there. Andrew for the Christadelphian, Jeremy for the Testimony, Carl for the Lampstand, etc. Do expect some queries as to why you want to use it, how and where. So they want to control their material as much as you would want to control your own. Material first published before 1950 is past that sort of 70-year rule generally now, but still think about why you want to use it, why there's no better way to say that. Is that the right way to present it to the audience? Could you send them a link instead, or in some other way present that material rather than in a very content-heavy presentation? Creative Commons, some of those restricted, some of those just need an attribution to go through, you know, from so-and-so's name, and you can use the links online to follow through that. There's Wikimedia Commons, some Flickr, and things like the ABC Open Archive. And there's more and more of these coming out now that is full of material that has been released from copyright, or has a very, very simple model that you can use, that you just copy and paste a little line in there and say, this is where this came from. It's from the Open Archive, everything's good to go. So there's more and more material now that is reacting to the world of difficult copyright by making more things available. And when it comes to Google, we did promise we'd get there. So if you're trying to replicate Brother Tony Lyons' talk in your own words, there's the Tools button. So click on the Tools button next to Settings in your Google Images search and drop down into Labeled for Non-Commercial Reuse if you want to find material that you can use more easily. So non-commercial reuse with modification is somewhat more restrictive, because then you're talking about modifying the thing and taking chunks off of it, but non-commercial reuse will get you through. So probably there's at least one in there that turned up on Brother Tony's talk. So very, very simple to filter that down and extract those through. And when it comes to Bible versions we can use, there are certainly some limits. There are those that are out of copyright, like the King James and the ASV, but do beware of mechanical copyright. If you stick one of those things in the photocopier, the publisher may still come at you and say, you know, the words you're free to copy, but not the way we've laid them out. Thank you very much. So there's all sorts of traps. Try not to just copy things that are still under permission. Look, if you've got a book, look in the beginning and work out what the conditions are applicable to that. So Young's Literal, Darby, and JPS, but not Jerusalem, are now out of copyright. There's some new but useful ones. Obviously, do beware of the language and the translations. So just do your research, do your rumination. World English Bible, New English Translation. The ESV simply asks that you put in brackets ESV after the quotation that you've used, but is otherwise very low on the restrictions. And then you've got the ones like the NIV, New King James, and the NASB, which strictly limit how many words you can use. That you cannot use a complete book, which is a problem for some of the smaller ones, and not more than 25% of one of those books. And if you look them up online, you can see that most of them have a blurb that needs to be quoted somewhere. Like, this is the one for New International, the Holy Bible, New International Version, copyright, blah, 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 used by permission, etc., etc. They want that to be shown in there to say that you've acknowledged the copyright terms that they've made it available under. So 500 verses maximum, not a complete book, not more than 25% of one of those books.
And that's the terms of their permission. So we really need to do the full quote, right? Not just to put NIV, right?
So ESV, they've limited down, just say this, but
Yep.
others, New King James, NIV, they want a blurb to be quoted to show that you've acknowledged that.
If you're writing a set of notes, scripture notes on the book of Malachi, say, Brother Lee's going to write his up after his excellent series of talks, then he wouldn't want to use the complete book of Malachi in his notes from the NIV because he would have to go and seek permission for that independently.
But that would be covered by the ecclesial license to a degree. So you want to look up that ecclesial license because you're sending it out for internal consumption as opposed to YouTube. So there's an intersection of those two ideas as well there. So did want to cover this one, what to expect if you do ask. So some content producers are keen to spread the gospel. You're probably going to find some of those as you're reaching around, particularly with some of those beautiful drawings and pictures you can see around of Christian authors. So they'll be keen to simply spread the gospel, depending on whether they find out you're one of those filthy cults. Some of them are keen to make a living from their work. So that's what they do. They sit at home and they make pictures and draw them up. So they'd like a few dollars because that's what they do, even though they're making money from God's work. Unfortunately, they are the owner. They're entitled to that. Question from Jamie: does the restriction on translations apply to a reading as an introduction to a talk? If you read 3rd John, New King James, would you preach copyright?
Technically, maybe.
If you're doing more than 25%, you're performing it in that sense.
You've got the whole of the book, yeah. You've got a whole book of the Bible.
We'll have to follow that one up, I think.
You might need to look at the fine detail of the New King James. Just Google it, Jamie, you'll find the answer.
Yeah, all right, another one to look up. So you'll find a difference in response time between individual operators, little mum and pop stores that might respond very quickly or just ignore your response because they don't get around to it. Or you might have a longer delay response from a large organization, but they've got a system and they'll always get back to you eventually. So do allow a couple of weeks for a response and don't assume something is free. The laborer is worthy of his hire. It comes from Luke chapter 10. So really the sum total of it is this, which is that, I can't wait to hear and read what you create, your muffins, as it were. I hope they're tasty. I hope you enjoy the creation process of them. YouTube is quite restrictive in terms of what we can do now, but the laws have been around for quite some time. We do need to acknowledge them, and we can produce wonderful material using the scriptural principles that have been provided to us.
So perhaps, Tim, before we go, let's just address at least some of these questions we've got that perhaps we haven't fully answered. So the Sunday school teacher and the image on Google. So perhaps elaborate what the answer is there. Applying your newfound knowledge.
So the Sunday school teacher one, I would not be using material that is under full copyright. So if you go into Google, I would definitely be using the non-commercial reuse one to say, we've reproduced that. Otherwise, stick to your 10% rule for something that's under copyright. Only 10% of a piece of material for that educational purpose, internal in-house model. Definitely don't grab the whole thing and print it out. For the
if you did the search in Google and found something labelled for non-commercial reuse, you would be fine to use that, but you ought to attribute it to its creator. So that's one of them. Now there was also this question about the quotation on slides from books. So which books can we quote on our slides, Tim? And what sort of quotes?
Which sort of books? As in scriptural books or Christian books? Check the copyright at the front. So author's death plus 70 years is the length of the copyright that's available to them. Once you're into that, you're looking at quoting a very small amount of it and not the core example. So if the piece that you want to copy is this core nub of their idea that all of their skill has been poured into, then you really shouldn't quote it, simply because on a YouTube example, you are not just using it for an internal need, you're actually publishing it out as your own material again. So that's where it's changed from something we used to do in the past to something that we cannot do on YouTube. If you're putting their core intellectual property, their quality and their the substantial part.
Yeah.
If you're putting the substantial part up on YouTube, then you've breached their copyright because they have ownership of that material. So try to instead ingest it and make your own muffin.
And there's also this question about, I think, yes. So we can quote from works that are more than where the copyright has expired. So that is something that's relevant. So sometimes not always so easy to know whether the copyright has expired. But there's
an element there as well, Andrew. I think we could get quite inconsistent in our approach to things. So if we find ourselves continuing to quote large slabs of text, particularly the older ones, because they're available under, they're out of copyright, we'll continue to foster that same behavior of copying others' material rather than ruminating on it and producing something that is, unique to us. And I don't want any presenter on this forum to think that their thoughts are not what we want to hear in the audience. We'd love to hear what it is that you have to say from your perspective, from your understanding of God, your relationship with Him and our Lord, that produces your unique perspective on things. So we definitely use those other quotes and those books to show evidence of our research and that we've backed up our material, but you don't need to quote it to authenticize yourself. You are the one presenting. You are the one we're there to hear. We want to hear what's in your heart as opposed to what you can quote.
I would observe, though, that sometimes we have taken a really good thought from somebody else's work, and perhaps Christadelphians, by and large, haven't been in the habit of attributing where that has come from. And I think we respect the authors, be they brethren or not, if we recognise their contribution to our thinking. And then when it comes to, hopefully the bulk of the rest of the presentation, that we're capable of demonstrating how we've developed that thought, applied it in different ways, and, explored its relevance and usefulness to us. So it's not that we can't use that material, but, when it's been written by, another brother somewhere else or by somebody outside of the truth, we respect the author's creative work, and then develop our own thinking on top of that in the ways that you've established. It has its place.
And that comes back to the idea too, that the idea is not copyright. The expression of the idea is copyright. So the author having an idea about something is something that we can take and attribute to them, but using the exact way that they've laid it out, following the method they've used to go from step A, step B, step C to conclusion is a breach of their copyright. But talking about their idea is okay, as long as we've made an understanding of that for ourselves.
Yeah, and particularly we're not taking huge chunks of their words and using them as though they're our own. And if we are going to be quoting from books and the like, that we do it in that sort of same sort of way, whether it's out of copyright or not, I think, but obviously respecting the copyright law. So on the question of licensing, Tim, let's just sort of come back to this. We have this CCLI license, and what about and CALs that you mentioned? Do you want to just mention when they're relevant and what they apply to?
So that the CLS license, I didn't find to be particularly enlightening as to what comes with it. So there's a million corporations that receive their dues from that copyright.com.au model that we subscribe to on a per head basis, I think, Steve, which grants us ability to use those things for educational and worship purposes, which is within the meeting. So that permission stops at the point where you stick it up on YouTube. So if you want to produce a handout, if you want to photocopy something, up to 10% of a piece of material, you can do that within the license that we have, but don't put it on YouTube. So YouTube has to go under those fair dealing permissions or no copyright at all.
And we've basically subscribed to that based on the number of members we have, which is the way they work out how much we ought to be paying. And that's why, YouTube is left out of much of what they do. But if you think that the CCLI license, which is publicly available, if you think that the CCLI license that we've paid for might be suitable for something you want to put up on YouTube, just take it up with Brother Malcolm, and he has the capacity to communicate directly with CCLI and ask them explicitly so that we can really get a good answer. And we've found that they do answer our questions.
Very good.
So, Tim, that's been really good. I don't see any more questions from people. Brother Greg implied that maybe he had a question. So you're welcome to contribute your question, Greg, on the YouTube chat line. We'll take questions from there. I think we've addressed Peanut Phil's question there. So I'm not sure which Phil that one is. And it's been good to have Andrew Jolly's professional insights from teachers who've obviously been forced to address these issues.
Yeah, so on that most recent one, Andrew, so for religious institutions, it actually has an exception on music, plays and songs. So that's covered by a separate sort of APRA agreement on when it comes to music and songs. So the copyright license information we have applies to everything but that. So it stops at the music and it stops at YouTube.
And with respect to the music, by and large, our own hymns are covered by copyright agreements, and we have had some discussions with the Christadelphian, or information from the Christadelphian office about our ability to use that in streaming. But that doesn't mean that we don't have challenges with YouTube anyway, because YouTube just makes the assumption that hasn't been licensed. So Andrew Cridlin asked about fonts we use in presentations. Tim, do you have any thoughts about that?
I'm going to have to look that one up. I suspect Microsoft will let you do most things there, but yeah, if you're using a custom font that you've downloaded from somewhere, check the permissions that you bought with that license.
And once again, I can say for sure that there are plenty of fonts that have some sort of free use licensing. but sometimes they may have limitations. It's worth reading them and making sure you know what they are when you're downloading them and using them. So, yeah, good point, Andrew. All right. Well, we can answer Greg's question, which is whether there are two chat lines. There are, but they intersect, and so they're intersecting on my desk at the moment. And we hope that worked for everybody. I note that some ecclesias are using the YouTube chat quite a bit, and I don't think we really are using it much at all. So we could perhaps use that more in our Bs and lectures, and find ways for the speakers to get access to those questions. All right, so I think we appreciate everybody's input today. If there's no more questions, perhaps last call for questions.
So just looking at the fonts question, I think Gus has answered it as well. So there's an element that if you're using a consumer license of Microsoft Office, then you cannot profit from using those materials. So you can't print them out for sale or any of that kind of thing. If you're on a commercial license of Microsoft Office, then obviously you can use those for that. So because we're not for profit, that's when those fonts that are built into the Microsoft Office application become okay for us to use and publish.
And then if you're downloading and paying for fonts separately, you should be looking at the license agreements that you get with them as to what you can do with them. And, you know, who is the body that's downloaded them? You know, if your work's downloaded them, that doesn't necessarily mean you are doing it. And yes, Jamie's asked this question about royalties for talks. Yeah, well, actually,
the check's in the mail, Andrew, Jamie.
Yeah, it's about 10 times what it was last year. But it is interesting that the copyright rests with the creator, actually. And so if you're working for a company, you often find that your the rights in any intellectual property, including copyright that you create, belong to the company that you work for. And whilst we don't have those legal terms in our membership arrangements,
we are going to review the Constitution, Andrew.
Oh, maybe we could add something there.
Got opportunity.
Yeah. Anyway, so obviously, Brother Jamie thinks that because his talks were listened to, his talks on lot were listened to so frequently recently that will amount to a lot of royalties. But I don't think we've got the right settings on Google to make sure that ad royalty is flowing through. So sorry, Jamie.
But that would make it commercial use, Andrew. Then we'd lose the fonts.
I don't know whether it does make it commercial use, but maybe. Yes, we'd be making some money from it. So thank you, everyone. Thank you very much, Tim, for your work in putting this together. And if you have more questions about copyright, please direct them to Tim or to me. Brother Bruce Gerd also is interested, and he's a teacher as well, involved in this sort of stuff. And it sounds like Brother Andrew Jolly is a wealth of information and also able to very resourcefully come up with answers to difficult questions. So thanks, everybody.
You don't leave the house.
We will put this up on our channel so that people who couldn't join us today will be able to see it. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks all.